is sponsored by Dr. Glatter as a refuah shleima for Mordechai Gimpel ben Peril. Okay, it should be refuah shleima. So, the mitzvah, is Judaism obsessive compulsive? Do we have too many mitzvot? Are we too focused on the details? Are Jews a little nuts? You can imagine the staff meeting at the hotel before Pesach. Okay, the Jews are coming, so we need lots of tissues in the bathroom. They've got this thing about toilet paper. I don't know what it is. Okay, fine. And we also have to tell the plumber that everyone takes showers at the same time. This afternoon and this evening, and we've got to switch the stuff in the room. They're not use the coffee in the room, but they'll be using about 3 times as much food as normally is used by any type of, all these weird things. So, as my brother-in-law, when he did residency, he spoke to Rabbi David Revson, who is the founder of Nevei Yerushalayim's good friend of the family, and he says, Rabbi Revson, I'm going to be doing residency at a very religious Catholic hospital. Do you have any advice for me? And Rabbi Revson says, oh, don't worry about it. Catholicism is so bizarre, it makes Judaism look almost normal. So, but we have all these lots and lots of commandments. And I tell secular audiences, ask them, how many commandments? What do they usually say? 10. I say, oh, I'm sorry, I got bad news. Right, actually it's 613 commandments. Now, you're not obligated in all 613 unless you are married and divorced and single, male and female, Kohen Levi Yisrael, all simultaneously. I'm sure there are people like this in California, but for the... thank you very much. My apologies to any Californians here. But anyway, the question we have to ask is, what's the purpose of all these mitzvot? What's the purpose of all these commandments? What's the mechanism by which they function, etc.? So let me start with a story in which the Talmud relates Turnus Rufus, who was a Roman, used to often debate the rabbis. Turnus Rufus confronts Rabbi Akiva. And he says to Rabbi Akiva, he comes to him with a question. He says, hey Rabbi Akiva, actually I don't know if the ancient Romans had Italian accents, but I always imagine them like that. Caesar, sort of like Tony Soprano in a toga. You got problems with the Visigoths? We'll take care of it. Anyway, so, I'm sorry. So basically, Turnus Rufus comes over to Rabbi Akiva and he says, what's the better? What is better? The deeds of God or the deeds of man? Who does better work? God or the human being? So Rabbi Akiva, now I should point out, his question is a very good question. Because whatever Rabbi Akiva answers, there's a problem. If he says the deeds of God are superior to those of man, then he will counter by saying, then how do you have the chutzpah to change anything in the world? How dare you change anything in the world? If God's actions are superior to those of the human, so how can you, what are you, improving on God? And he says, and if you tell me that the human is superior to God, you obviously are a heretic. So he's totally confident. Totally confident. So he walks over to Rabbi Akiva, he asks him the question. Rabbi Akiva says, just a second, mate. Doesn't answer the question. Goes over to the fridge, comes back from the fridge with a stalk of wheat in one hand and a 3-layer chocolate mousse cake in the other. That is the Sachar Tort. That's a moist chocolate cake with a hint of raspberry running through it, white chocolate mousse, dark chocolate mousse, milk chocolate mousse, little shavings of Cadbury's chocolate on top. Oh my God. Okay, one sec. No, I'm all right. Anyway, so he comes in with a stalk of wheat in the cake, and Rabbi Akiva says to Turnus Rufus, you tell me, buddy, which is better? Deeds of God weighs around the stalk of wheat. Deeds of man weighs around the chocolate mousse cake. So what was Rabbi Akiva trying to teach us? A very clear lesson. He's trying to say the following. Yes, the stalk of wheat is the deed of God. Correct. However, God did not create it perfect. He created it in a way that it needs to be refined. God did not create the perfect world. He did not create, to paraphrase Dr. Pangloss in Voltaire's play Candide, who says this is the best of all possible worlds, right? if it would be Rabbi Pangloss, it would be, this is not the best of all possible worlds. It's the world designed to be made into the best of all possible worlds. God created the wheat so that we will take it and go through 10 steps from ploughing and planting and so on and so forth, all the way through to the creation of a bagel or a cake or something like that. So, and this indeed is the central idea of Judaism, which is that we need to refine the world and ourselves. And this is what I quoted here in the Medrash: the mitzvahs were given, l'tzaref behenes habriyos, in order to refine humanity. And refinement, l'tzaref, to refine, I think there's 3 major areas of refinement. Number 1 is my relationship to others. Number 2, my relationship to self. Number 3, in my relationship to God. Maharal says this in the beginning of his commentary to Ethics of the Fathers. Maharal tells us there are 3 areas of refinement, and they're all about relationships between myself and others, myself and God, and myself and myself. Example, a child, an infant only thinks about themselves. Nothing wrong with that. They're supposed to do, right? I mean, it's not like you expect them to be helping out, Leah, let me help you with that diaper. No, it's not going to happen, right? So the infant only thinks about themselves. However, right, as they grow, there's an expectation that they'll start thinking about other people as people. There's a certain point, up to a certain point, they don't think that way. My youngest is 11. When he was 2, and he'd wake up in the middle of the night, Abba! Right, and I'd slip into the room. My wife trained him to say Abba after 10 o'clock. So I walk out, right, and he says, 3 o'clock in the morning, he says, I am thirsty. And I say, who the heck wakes up thirsty at 3 o'clock in the morning? You know what I mean? Alcoholics and babies. I mean, so he says, I get him a glass of water. And how much water does a young boy drink when he wakes up at 3 in the morning, thirsty? You know how much he drinks? 1 molecule. Right? You need scientific instruments to measure how much water he drinks. Right? The amount he drinks, like, look, there's oxygen and stuff in the air. You make it yourself, it's like a tiny amount. Anyway, so, however, at that age, you don't expect him to be concerned with other people. As you mature, you become more aware of other people as people. As you mature, you become more aware of other people's needs, you become more aware of other people's idiosyncrasies and wants and so on and so forth. Not everyone does, though. There are people who mature, who grow, who become adults, and they're still basically like Rafi at age 2. No one else exists. Right? Most of those people drive on the roads in New York and New Jersey. Right? They don't care if you die as long as they don't let you merge. That's it. It makes no difference. Makes no difference. Okay? That's standard driving practice here. It's brutal, obnoxious, arrogant, and disgusting. It's unbelievable. You put on your indicator, guarantee. What will happen you put on your indicator? Every gap in the traffic will close to 1 millimetre. 1 millimetre. They don't care. You could be going off the road, it doesn't matter. No merging. I was in Australia. I drive in Australia. I visit once a year. I was just there 2 weeks ago. You put on your indicator, guess what happens? People open up to let you merge. I didn't merge. I thought it was a trap. I've been driving New York so long, I say, what the heck, oh no. Right? But again, the awareness of other people, that they're actual people, the awareness of other people and their needs and everything else, that's number 1. Relationship, refinement, what we call mitzvot, bein adam l'chaveiro, the mitzvot that govern the relationships between myself and others to make me more aware of other people as people. Number 2, relationship to self. Again, the young child doesn't understand what the self is. The young child sees the self as basically the body, the stomach. The young child, at a really young, they don't even realise their legs are their own, until they realise, oh, I just moved that, oh, cool, right, etc. And the parents are thinking, oh, Nobel Prize, But basically, the little kid becomes more aware of the self. However, the self, we have to understand, is not only the body and the nerve endings, it's also the soul, the intellect. And so, therefore, part of the process of refinement and growth of the human being is to become more aware of the spiritual side of the self. And consequently, we have mitzvot bein adam le'atzmo. There are mitzvot between you and yourself to make yourself more understanding and aware of the spiritual side of the human being. And then third, there is relationship to God. an awareness of the existence of God. People will go through life not even aware, not even thinking about God. Some of these people are actually religious, right? And to actually think of God and but to have an awareness and relationship with the Creator, that's what we call mitzvot bein Adam lamakom. So we have three categories of commandments between yourself and others, yourself and God, yourself and self. And this is mentioned. Where do we see this in Pirkei Avos? We see in the second Mishnah. The world stands on three things: Torah, avodah, gmilus chasodim. The study of Torah, which is a mitzvah between yourself and self. Avodah, which is prayer, service to God, which is mitzvah between you and God. Gmilus chasodim, which is between you and other people. So each one, the development of a relationship. So that is number one. We have this idea of refinement. Number two, it's also an awareness, and the idea of the mitzvahs also is that we believe that every single moment in space, in time, every single place in space is infused with a spiritual essence. There is a village called Bella Vista del Paraíso in Peru. I'm sure you're familiar with it. And Bella Vista del Paraíso in Peru has there's almost no water in the area, no drinkable water, potable water in the area. What do? So water gets trucked in to this place. However, one of the ways in which they get water, they harvest water, is it's very cloudy up there and there's a lot of fog. So they've got these huge nets stretched out on frames. And what happens is the fog and the clouds hit the nets, the water droplets condense on the fibre and run down into troughs under the nets. They actually harvest water from the air, which is really cool. And they get each net is about 100 litres a day or something like that. So it's amazing stuff. So, of course, why they built a village there is beyond imagination. I don't know, whatever. Right? They were probably encouraged to do so by National Geographic. So the photographer can talk about the nets at dusk, anyway. But the reason I mention this village is because the way I see a lot of the mitzvahs is exactly like those nets. There are droplets of spirituality in different times of the day, of the month, of the year, of the week. There are different droplets of spirituality hovering around in different places. When you do the mitzvahs, what you're actually doing is harvesting that spiritual energy which is there in that particular time or place, like those nets. Makes sense? Like, I feel the Seder is not just like a commemoration. The Seder is not just education. It's more than that. It's also experiential, and actually it's a recapturing of the sparks, the spiritual energy and sparks that the Jews felt when they got out of Egypt. Theoretically, we should be able to capture that same energy by doing the mitzvahs related to that particular time at the Seder. And the same is true of all the mitzvahs of the Yom Tovim and Shabbos, and the mitzvahs that vary by the day and the time of day and so on and so forth. It is actually all about capturing that energy. So that's another aspect of the mitzvahs, very important. Number three, very strange statement. Reb Shimon ben Gamliel said, a person should not say, I can't stand meat and milk. Sausage makes me nauseous. Pepperoni pizza, he should not say that. He should say, I would love a pepperoni pizza. I find cheeseburgers to be very attractive. Right? Philadelphia cheesesteak, oh my gosh. Right? I would love that. Right? So, walking along in Center City, right, Walnut Street, they've got those carts there, and I go, look, no one knows me here. It's winter. I've got my hood on. Like, who knows, right? So what Rosh Gamliel says, a person should not say, I can't stand it. A person should say, I'd like it, but God said not to. Very strange statement. You should walk around desiring, lusting after non-kosher food. Whatts the idea? So Maimonides explains this in the chapter 6 of his introduction to Pirkei Avos. And I think I understood it when I first read to my kids the great work of English literature, Dr. Seuss's Green Eggs and Ham. Green Eggs and Ham. So what happens is Dr. Seuss, I'm sure you read the book, my kids grew up in Haranoff in Jerusalem, and religious family, my wife is religious, and I open the book, I read it to them, and I start off Green Eggs and Ham. First question my kids ask, what is ham? For some reason in the child's mind, green eggs are totally acceptable. They seem to have no problem with this whatsoever. That is either because of the principle in child psychology, kids are weird, or it is because of the school cafeteria. Very disturbing, but possible. Anyway, so either way, the kids say, what is ham? So ham is the meat of a pig. What is their response? I say, it's not ooh. They say, we don't eat it. I say, you know, we eat Lebanon broccoli and stuff. They say, oh, yeah, good point. Right, so you know, what is the idea? So they say, it must be unhealthy. I say, it's not unhealthy. Nothing unhealthy about it. In China, a huge part of their diet is pork. Do they look like they're in danger of extinction? With Chinese, right? You know, like plagues of trichinosis cutting swathes through Sichuan province, right? I don't think so, right? They seem to be fine. So what is it about? I don't really know the reason, right? I don't really know. Of course, I describe it in detail in my book, Gateway to Judaism, but I don't know the reason, right? However, the idea is the following, right? The reason I'm refraining from it is not because I find it disgusting. I find it, right? The reason I'm refraining from it is because God told me not to. That's what Rosh Gamliel is saying. He's saying I should not look at it as inherently disgusting, despicable, tasteless, etc., or tasting bad. Why? Because then I am missing one of the main points. What's one of the main points of the mitzvot? Is self-control. The idea of self-control. The idea of being able to say no. Being able to say, right, the human being has that ability, right? It's that. Just because it's there, it doesn't mean I have to eat it, except on Pesach, obviously, right? I understand next year we're installing a vomitarium. Anyway, but the idea of not eating, of just saying no, when it comes to kashrus, look into Roman history for those who are not familiar. Anyway, but the idea of a lot of the laws of the Torah is the concept of self-control. That means if I have brainwashed my children to believe that ham is actually disgusting, then refraining from it is not an act of self-control. Is it? Right? If they say, oh, you know, it probably is good, it's, you know, reasonably healthy, it doesn't, you know, so, and they refrain from it, then that is an act of self-control. That's an act of self-control. If I walk by a huge, quivering, you know, average teenage, let's take 16-year-old teenage girl, right, on a diet, she walks past the kiddush, there's a huge platter of pachah. Pachah, that's calf's foot jello, right? She walks by and says, I'm on a diet, I'm not having it. Does that show me self-control? Am I impressed by that? I'm not impressed. Right? If it's a huge pile of cream puffs, the chocolate-covered cream puffs with the puff pastry with the cream inside, and it's milky, and oh my God, right? And she walks by and says, I'm only having 3, that's self-control. That I'm impressed with. Okay, so the third idea behind the mitzvahs is actually the idea of control of the most important thing to control, which is self. Number 4, the idea of imitation of God. Well, imitatio Dei, it's called in Latin. What imitation of God? You see, what's the idea here? The Ramchal, Mordechai, Lozato, and Maimonides both maintain that the purpose of the mitzvahs is actually to imitate God. Why? Because you see, ultimately, we are supposed to have a relationship with the Creator, a relationship with God. But in order, and in fact, the joy, the pleasure, and the goodness of having a relationship with God requires that there be a certain degree of compatibility, a certain degree of similarity. If I'm totally dissimilar to God, if there is no compatibility, how can I possibly have any pleasure in that relationship? How can I even have a relationship? So, for example, a while back, Coca-Cola had a competition, it's a long time ago, competition. You open up the lid and you look inside and it says, you've won. And you look on the side to see what you've won, right? Or it says, you open up the lid and it says, try again. I tell you, I had a guy at my house for Shabbos. He opens a Coke bottle. He reads it. It says, try again. So he closes it and he opens it. He closes it and he opens it. He says, like, dude, this is not working. It's not, yeah. Anyway, so basically, you look on the side, it says, you've won. You look on the side, and it says, 1 week with the Beastie Boys. That was the prize. You got to win 1 week chilling with the Beastie Boys. The Beastie Boys are an American singing group of some sort. I'm not familiar with them that much. Anyway, but they're singers, right? Beastie Boys. You get to spend, I imagine the second prize is 2 weeks with them. So you get to week with the Beastie Boys. Now, I imagine to myself that the Berlin Philharmonic Orchestra is playing here in the States, conducted by the great German conductor Herbert von Karajan. So Herbert von Karajan just finished with this series of Beethoven concerts. He goose steps backstage afterwards and he feeds in some euros into the Coke machine. He takes out a Coke bottle, he opens up the lid and it says, "You have won." That's German for "you've won." And he looks at this and he looks on the side and it says, "Wann Weg mit dem Beastie Boy Chicks." Right? Let me ask you something. Right, Herbert von Karajan, German conductor of the Berlin Philharmonic, hanging out for a week with the Beastie Boys.
Yes.
First prize or condemnation to the depths of hell? For both of them. Right. Yeah. Well, it could be, I don't know. Right, I don't think so. I think it would be, I could get it more extreme if you want. I could do, we could have, I don't even know, not even familiar with who's out there now. Anyway, so, you could have, let's say, Ravi Shankar, one of the greatest sitarists ever, the Rebbe of the Beatles. Right? Now, I don't know how much he would enjoy, for example, hanging out with, actually he probably would, an African drummer, whatever. Anyway, doesn't matter. Right, so you get the point. Right, in order for them to enjoy that relationship, they would need to have some level of compatibility, similarity, etc. For us to have that relationship with God requires compatibility, similarity. The Rambam, in fact, says, and the Ramchal, Ramosh Chal, from different ends of the spectrum in terms of rationalism and mysticism, they both agree and they both say that the idea behind the mitzvahs is really to cultivate a relationship with God to become similar and compatible with the Creator. Number 5, I picked up in Santa Barbara, California. Santa Barbara, University of California, Santa Barbara, a very chilled, laid-back place. I was speaking to some Jewish students there. It was really chilled. The only words I could hear from the students when I walked into the room were party and dude and chill and that type of thing. Party, dude, that type of thing. And they all spoke like this for some reason. I don't know, maybe it's the surf that gets it. I don't know what it is. But so they're sitting on chairs like this, but they're all managed to be horizontal. It's like walking into a morgue. There's all these bodies. Right? And I was trying to make conversation with one of the dudes. And I said, so, what's your major? And he says, I said, no, precisely, please. And he said, dude? I said, party on. And he says, like something between religion and philosophy. I said, what is that? And he says, revelation. His major is revelation studies. I think in his case there was a heavy dose of organic chemistry involved in that. But anyway, it could be it's a history of religion course. So revelation. So I thought to myself, I was driving back with my friend Moshe. We're driving back to wherever we were staying. I think it was Los Angeles. And I thought to myself, I went to a Hasidic high school. I went to a Lubavitch high school. So I am somewhat Hasidic. Reform Hasidic, obviously. So, but I went to the what we call basic, right? Anyway, Reform Hasid doesn't matter. All right. So we learnt that the Baal Shem Tov used to say that whatever you experience, you're supposed to learn from that experience. If you didn't learn from the experience, you've wasted the moment, right? It's the Yiddish version of Carpe Diem. So anyway, someone else is going to give a lecture on that, I think. Right, so I thought, what would if the Baal Shem Tov was chilling with me, with the dudes, right, in Santa Barbara, what would the Baal Shem Tov have picked up? What would he have learned from this? And I realised, I'm sorry?
That the word reveille is in Revelation.
maybe, that's very Hasidic, I like that. Anyway, however, I get paid for the jokes, all right, just kidding. Right, so anyway, it's like this. So that's all right. All right. So what the Baal Shem Tov, I think, would have learned is that really it's actually an explicit Tikkunei Zohar. The Tikkunei Zohar, which is a section of the Zohar that deals with the first posuk in Bereshis, 70 explanations of it, etc. So the Tikkunei Zohar actually says that every single one of us is majoring in revelation. That's actually why we're all here. Revelation did not end at Sinai. Revelation is something which we are involved in every single moment of our lives, because we are poised between revelation and concealment. You can act in such a way that you are revealing the divine image in the human being, or you can act in such a way that you're concealing the divine image in the human being. Is that not so? So the Ramchal puts it, explaining that Tikkunei Zohar, that we are balanced between revelation and concealment. And whatever we do can actually be an act of concealment, act of revelation. I remember being in Toronto as a rabbi in Thornhill for 4 years. I had just picked up a copy of Gray's Anatomy, very cheap. And as you know, Gray's Anatomy has got these diagrams of the human body and all the different layers and parts of the body. It's very interesting. It was very cheap, so I picked it up. And I was reading the part about the human face. It's got the structure of the jaw and the... I opened up at random, sitting in my office, open up at random, so I see that I'm looking at the jaw, and very interesting, and trying to look at the structure here. And anyway, the secretary phones through, says, "Rabbi, there's someone here to see you." So I say, "Give me a minute." So I put away the Gray's Anatomy, I take out my Talmud, I say, "Send him in." Right, so he walks into my... So this guy walks into my office, and he has a jaw. Oh, it's nice. And I'm looking at him. I've just been looking at the jaw in Gray's Anatomy, and here an actual jaw walks in, and I'm like... Right, and he's thinking, well, the rabbi's really focused today. Well, it's a change. It's unbelievable. And he's like... And he's prattling on about something. I don't know, depression or suicide. I don't know what he's talking about. Right, so he was like prattling on, and I'm looking at it. I'm noticing, as he's talking, he's got a click in his jaw. I'm dying to take the Gray's Anatomy and say, "Could you just do that again?" Right? Self-control. I kept it down there, right? And so after a few minutes, he looks at me and he says, "What do you think I should do?" I think to myself, go to a surgeon. What do you want? Got a problem with your jaw? Why come to a rabbi? Right? So you see, what was the problem? I was involved in concealment. I was looking at the jaw instead of listening to the jaw, as Winston Churchill would have put it. Right? I was so focused on the externalities of the jaw that the essence, the pnimius, the inner message didn't come out. I didn't even hear it. I was concealing the world. So we can do this. Unfortunately, when we look at someone, something, etc., we can either look at it with eyes that reveal or eyes that conceal. When we hear something, we can either hear it as concealment or revelation. This is so true in relationships, everything. But it's an amazing idea. And according to the Zohar, the idea of a mitzvah, every mitzvah is an act of revelation. It reveals God's name in the world. And I'll tell you, the Zohar puts it beautifully, because the Zohar says the following. In the word mitzvah, there's an idea that the sages... when they looked into the Torah, they actually found a lot of information encoded in the Torah in ways other than just simple translation of the words. People are probably familiar with some of the encoding systems. Gematria would be one. But there's another one called Atbash. Atbash is Aleph Taf Beit Shin. It's a substitution system used by the Talmud, actually, that the Aleph, first letter of the alphabet, is substituted with the Taf, last letter. Beit, second letter of the alphabet, is substituted with the Shin, second last letter, and Gar, and so on and so forth. Anyone heard of this, Atbash? The idea behind Atbash is a very logical idea. Atbash, because you see, there's a verse which we say in L'chadodi, right? Sof ma'aseh b'machshava techila. The end of action is the beginning of thought. What does that mean? The Kabbalists explain it in the following way. The first thought that God has, or like an architect, like a person wants to build a house, what's the first thought that you have in your mind? Is the complete house. This is the complete house, what I want it to look like. Now, what's the last action? The complete house. So actually the first thought, Aleph, equals the last action, Taf. What's the last thought that you have? The last thought that you have will be, okay, I better go to the local council and get a permit. So your first action and last thought are together in the middle. And then, so to speak, there's a step down process from the thought, right? The complete structure, the framework, the materials, et cetera, the piece of land, the bureaucratic license. And the first action goes in the opposite order. So far makes sense? Understood? Right? So you've got Atbash, Aleph Taf, Beit Shi, and so on and so forth. So in Atbash, Mem, mitzvah, is written Mem Tzadi Vav Hey. So Vav Hey, as you'll all be aware, are the last two letters of the name of God. Okay? The name of God, Yud and Hey, and Vav and Hey, the last two letters of God's name, are found in the word mitzvah, very openly, revealed. But the first two letters of God's name are also found in the word mitzvah, but they're concealed. Mem substitutes with a yud, and Sadi substitutes with the Hey, because it's the 10th last and the 5th last. So therefore, what word do you get in Atbash? Yud Hey and Vav Hey. However, in the word mitzvah, first two letters of God's name are concealed. The last two letters of God's name are revealed. It reflects the reality of the world. There is certainly a degree of revelation. We experience revelation at Egypt, at Sinai, etc. At certain moments in history, you have these revelations of God's presence. So we don't always see that. So therefore, Vav Hey is there, but it's revealed. But much of the time, the first two letters are concealed. What does a mitzvah do? It reveals God's name in the world. So that's the idea of, that's another aspect of the mitzvot, is this concept of revelation. Finally, number 6, we are told in Mishlei, Ki ner mitzvah v'Torah or. The mitzvah is a candle and the Torah is light. Thank you. My mother is English, so whenever I, just like a habit, I pick up a cup, I always have my pinky out. It's like an English thing to do. So, and I asked my mother, why is that? She said, well, if a peasant walks into the room, you can do this. Anyway, so, now, it says, Ner mitzvah v'Torah or. The mitzvah is a candle and the Torah is light. So the Ger Rebbe, the Sfas Emes, explained it in the following way. He said light is this very ethereal, spiritual type of, I wouldn't call it a substance, but it's a thing which is very spiritual. In this world, I mean, from a physics perspective, you know what I mean, light is like very strange, exceptional, has weird properties. Is it a wave? Is it a particle? It's both, right? Nothing goes faster than the speed of light. I think there are some attempts, but Israeli taxi drivers possibly, but generally nothing goes faster than the speed of light. And amazing, there's 186,550 miles per second. It's unbelievable. What do you need to produce light? Paraffin wax and string. You'd think that the type of technology you'd need to produce light would be the size of the hotel, you know, with these lenses and stuff like that. Unbelievable. What you need? Paraffin wax and string. So what the Ger Rebbe says is the following. He says, really, the light of Torah is this infinite, amazing ideas and concepts. He says, but you'd think that in order to get these, in order to incorporate them, understand them, assimilate them into your life, you'd need some type of amazing, incredible technology. He says, no, all you need for them is paraffin wax and a string. You know what I mean? Light Shabbos candles, Erev Shabbos. Okay, what you've done is this amazing, it's a mitzvah. Right? It's an incredible spiritual action, but all you've used is some very simple physical device. And the same is true of all the mitzvahs. They are basically physical devices, physical actions that contain within them the light of Torah, meaning the eternal, infinite light of Torah. And it's a way to access that light. So, and in fact, since humans work through symbolism, we work through actions, so therefore the Torah comes to us through actions, it makes it accessible to us through the mitzvot. So that's another idea which the Ger Rebbe mentions. We have basically 6 concepts behind the mitzvahs. How do they work? What's the mechanism by which they work? So that we come to the second part of the class, methodology of the mitzvahs. So first of all, we should start with a basic idea about morality. Peter Singer, who I disagree with in almost everything he ever said in his entire life, including and the, but there is one thing which I agree with, right? He points out that morality requires 2 components. It requires a commitment to the moral ideas, and it requires acting in a manner consistent with those commitments. That makes sense so far? So you need commitment and consistency. Could you be consistent without being committed? You could. You wouldn't be really moral. For example, if you act consistently with certain rules but you're not committed to them at all, that doesn't make you moral. For example, let's say you live in Saudi Arabia and you don't shoplift. Does anyone find that impressive? Someone in Saudi Arabia who doesn't do shoplifting? No, they're not committed to honesty and stuff. They're committed to having their hand remain on the end of their arm, right? That's all. So it's not like or you live in Singapore and you drive safe. In Singapore, there's closed-circuit television cameras everywhere. If you speed, commercial vehicles have lights attached to the roof, which were attached to the speedometer. If they go over the speed limit, the light starts flashing, can only be turned off by the police, and they see your light flashing, they pick you up, you got a ticket. They want to do that in New Jersey. They figured the whole state would look like a disco. It would be like unbelievable, right? It'd be flashing lights everywhere. But in Singapore, if you vandalise something, you get publicly whipped. You know, if you litter, you get an on-the-spot huge fine, or you have to go to prison. If you jaywalk, on-the-spot fine, go to prison. It's unbelievable. So Singapore, the traffic flows very smoothly. There is no litter. There's no graffiti. Right? It's totally safe to walk the streets almost any time of day or night. Great place if you don't mess up. Right? So now, people there, not necessarily is a person moral because he follows these rules. It just may be that the person can't get away with anything. So they're consistent, but they're not committed. Now, morality also is the other way around. You need to be consistent as well. If you're only committed to some moral ideals, but you're not consistent, that doesn't make you moral either. Like, for example, Mr. Brown gets a phone call from the principal. The principal says, "Mr. Brown, your son is being suspended." And he says, "Oh, really? From where?" He says, "No, he's being sent home from school." He says, "Why is that?" He says, "He was caught cheating on a final." Mr. Brown says, "My son? Cheating? Impossible. My son is pious and he's brilliant. So even if he needed to cheat, he wouldn't. And he doesn't need to cheat." So the principal says, "Mr. Brown, we have evidence that your son was cheating." He says, "What's the evidence?" He says, "The boy sitting next to your son and your son had exactly the same answers in the exam." What is Mr. Brown going to say? "The son of Satan sitting next to my boy, right? He cheated from my son. Send him home. My boy is good." So he says, "We have further evidence, Mr. Brown." He says, "What's the evidence?" He says, "Question number 13. The boy sitting next to your son wrote, 'I don't know.' Question number 13, your son wrote, 'I don't know either.'" So it would appear to me, maybe he's not so bright or so pious. So the kid gets sent home from school, and Mr. Brown subjects him to the worst form of punishment known to the adolescent mind, the parental lecture. Just get into the office. No, not the study. Get into the study. He gets into the study. He says, "Okay, turn off the iPod. Now the kid's unwired and in the adolescent listening mode, which looks type of like this, with whatever poised on his lips." Whatever, they have to do I can never coordinate the eye roll and the whatever. My daughter's been trying to teach me, but I think I'm just too old, whatever. I do it too late, whatever. So basically the father goes to the filing cabinet, and you've got the parental lectures, adulthood, the cars, dating, drugs. The honesty lecture. So the honesty lecture, Mr. Brown gives the honesty lecture to the kids. He's sitting there with a story about his grandfather he's heard a million times, and how it's wrong to cheat. We don't care about the grades you get, right? And all I care about is you're honest, and so on and so forth. In the middle of the honesty lecture, the phone rings. Mr. Brown says, "Honey, could you please get that?" She says, "Of course, dear." This doesn't actually happen. But she says, "Hello? Oh, Mr. Katz, how are you?" Mr. Brown says, "I'm not home." "I'm sorry, he's not home, Mr. Katz." "Yes. On the cell phone?" Mr. Brown, No. Shh. "Yes, he's flying. Yeah, he's on a business trip. Sorry, can't get him on the cell phone. Yeah, he's going to, South Island, New Zealand, 16 hours. Yeah. Okay, bye, click." And so now he carries on with the honesty lecture. So now, I think probably Mr. Brown believes what he said regarding his son, that it's wrong to cheat in the exam. He feels it's wrong, it's a bad thing, it's better to get a lousy mark than to cheat. He probably believes in that. He's committed to that, but he's not very consistent, is he? And consistency is extremely important in morality. By the way, in education, it's also important. That's why the next year, the principal phones back and he says, "Mr. Brown, I don't want to talk about this over the phone. This could be a police matter. You need to come to school." He says, "Oh my God, what's he done?" Right, he comes to school, the kid's in the principal's office. He said, "What is it?" The principal says, "Your son has been stealing office supplies from the school for the past year." Looks at the kid, says, is this true? Kid says, yeah, it's true. The father says, I don't understand it. You need office supplies. Tell me, I'll bring them home from work. Now, morality and consistency. So you need two things, Singer says. Commitment and consistency. When you think about it, it is very difficult. And one of our great challenges in life is to really be consistent. It's not easy. If you believe, most of us probably, I think if you'd examine a lot of people's basic commitments morally, you'd probably find a lot of similarity. Where it divides up is how consistent we are in our commitment to that moral idea, right? Think about it, right? You ask most people, are you committed to thou shalt not steal? Of course, yeah, absolutely. So why did you cut the line? Well, that's not stealing. I didn't. Well, everyone else has got a certain amount of time. They've all been waiting there. You cut the line. Why isn't that stealing? Well, because I have carpool, and the kid needs to go. Oh, and everyone else doesn't. Right? So, so you're not consistent. Or how about you lent that book to someone? I didn't give you permission to lend it. I just gave you permission to borrow it. I trust you in terms of your taking care of books. I don't trust your character judgment. You'd lend a book to Charles Manson as soon as he gets out, right? So therefore, so maybe he's good with books. I don't know. Anyway, so that's the point. Is that you've got to have. It's not so easy to be consistent. Now, it's interesting if you think of halacha, and this is an amazing model for halacha. If you think about what halacha is, Talmud, all the discussions in halacha, you know what they're all about? How to be consistent. For millions of people, over thousands of years, in hundreds of countries, in every possible socio-economic and geopolitical circumstance that you can imagine, and probably a bunch that you cannot imagine, how can we be consistent with the basic principles from Sinai? You want to know how to do that? That's where you need halacha. That's what the mitzvahs are. The Ramban, Nachmanides, alludes to this in Parshas Mishpatim. But the basic idea of all the mitzvahs and all of halacha and all of the Gemara is, you know what? I want to be consistent. But sometimes you've got a value conflict. We've got kibbut avayim, but we've got this mitzvah. Or sometimes we have, hello, this is costing so much money, I'm going to be impoverished afterwards. I have to do it. All right, there's all types of conflicts between one value and another. How do you parse the commitments and so on and so forth? To what extreme do you have to go in terms of this particular commitment? Shaveh pruta is theft, not pref, etc., etc. There's many, many levels of it. It's all about consistency. That is really what halacha is about. Okay. That is point number A. B, it's a living law. It means it has application to all situations. The fact that we only have 613, I think it's only 613, because if the fact of the matter is, Torah law actually deals with more situations than does any other legal system. Because there's no area of life which doesn't have its ramifications and doesn't have halachic and moral issues in Jewish law. Jewish law has something to say about absolutely everything. I'm going to give a class later on in the week, I think, about interactions with Gedolim in Eretz Yisrael. And one of the reasons I had a lot of interaction with various, especially with Rav Scheinberg, was because we used to have Ask the Rabbi. We still have AskTheRabbi.org and AskTheRabbi.org, but the type of questions that would come up, it's mind-boggling, and it's incredible that halacha really has something to say about every single situation that could possibly arise, even in situations that the sages of the Talmud could never have envisioned the technology that we have. But nevertheless, we find principles in the Talmud that actually resolve problems that we are having today morally with these things. So that's the second idea. I say rounded tablets because a very beautiful idea I heard from my teacher, Moshe Shapiro. You go to shuls all over the world, the tablets of the law on the Aron Kodesh, with the exception of gateways, right? But the tablets of the law on usually are shaped, rounded tops. Oh, like that. There we go. Right, they're rounded tops. Now, the truth is, historically, that's totally inaccurate, as you know. Right, historically, the tablets of the law, right, the luchos, right, two other tablets that Moses brought down. One is Hashem, one is, right, we did that Seder night, right? So the two tablets that actually were square, not rounded. So why do shuls all over the world have rounded tablets? You ever wondered about that? Yeah, I've heard all types of silly answers, right? Some people say, oh, it was Michelangelo, but Michelangelo actually has square stones, right? So it can't be him, right? And there are shuls before Michelangelo who had rounded tablets. And it's really shuls all over the world. What is it, the Feng Shui guy? The shul in Lvov The carpenter, Hasidic guy is carving the tablets, and the Feng Shui guy comes in and says, oh no, they've got to be rounded so that the energy can flow unimpeded from the ark, right? Come on, right? So why are they rounded? The answer, which I heard from my teacher, is the verse in Mishlei says, Kasveim al luach libecha. Write the words of Torah al luach libecha. What does that mean? On the tablets of your heart. So that the rounded tops is meant to be a stylized representation of the two chambers of the human heart, right? The human heart. And basically when you're looking at the tablets, you're supposed to see there is the written Torah, which is written in stone, but there's another Torah which is supposed to be inscribed on the hearts and minds of the Jewish people. And by having mitzvahs in all situations, times and places, that's a way of inscribing the Torah in our lives, on our hearts, etc. Number 3, awareness of the spiritual side of life. We often, the Aramaic word for a human is inshi. Aleph, Yud, Nun, Shin, Yud. Inshi. The root of that word is the same as the root for forgetting. When you do a siyum, when you finish a Masechta of the Talmud, you say, Lo tisnashe minan, lo ba'alma hadeim v'lo ba'alma da'asi. It should not be forgotten from us, neither in this world or the world to come. This is nashe, inshi, right? It means to forget, because really a human being forgets. That's what a human, that enables us to have free will, number one. That enables us to move on after tragedy. That enables us to continue even when there was pain, because it's a blessing. We have the blessing of forgetting, right? It's a good, there's a very positive component to forgetting. But the negative component, there's a negative side to it. Like everything, the negative side of forgetting is sometimes we get so caught up in just running around and doing what we have to do that we forget about why we're here. We forget about the spiritual side of life. We forget who we are. So we have reminders continuously. And the mitzvahs are these reminders. Prayer, you stop, right? According to Rabbi Yehuda Halevi, he says prayer is like a mini Shabbos. It's a mini Shabbos is a time that you step away from the world, you stop in your survival stuff, and you're only involved in something, and you're involved in enjoyment and spirituality. He says prayer is like that as well. You step away from the world, 10 minutes. It's a beautiful thing. One of the most beautiful. I just finished saying Kaddish for my father, Olav Shalom, recently, but one of the most beautiful things were the Mincha Minyanim in Manhattan. It's fantastic. Anyone who's familiar, it's great. You walk in here, you're in the busiest city in the world, just about. Okay, everyone is running out. There's all these people working hard to make a living, and you can walk in to a shul on 34th Street, and there's 200 people for mincha in the middle of the day. It's beautiful. There's mincha minyan. There's a shoe store with a mincha minyan. There's a law office with a mincha minyan. There was like a ladies' clothing company where they have a mincha minyan upstairs, not in the showroom. It's unbelievable. All this type of stuff. It's amazing. People are taking it's a miniature Shabbos in the middle of the day. It's great. It's a great thing. And one of the ideas of the mitzvah is to make me aware of the blessings when you make a bracha. What a beautiful thing. I mean, I've made, I was on the plane from Detroit to Seattle once. It was a very small plane. The type of plane where they ask people to move around to keep the balance. It's a commercial flight, but they asked 2 volunteers to move to the back. So I got up and a priest got up. Sounds like a joke, but it's actually, right? The rabbi and the priest got up. We walked to the back of the plane. It was actually a rabbi, a priest, and an imam get into a taxi. And the taxi driver turns around and he says, what is this, a joke? Anyway, so we get up and we move to the back of the plane and we're sitting, he's sitting next to the window, I'm next to the window, and there's 2 seats, there's an aisle and a seat and 2 seats in between us. And we get up to cruising altitude. My ears hadn't popped, so I couldn't hear a darn thing. And they bring me the kosher food. They always bring it first in order to exacerbate anti-Semitism. And so I get the food, and I said since I could not hear, I said the bracha pretty loud. I said, Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam, shahakol yeh b'vorah. That's the bracha on unidentifiable food, is shahakol. So, that's shahakol. And the priest says, excuse me? And as I'm chewing, my ear pops, and he says, excuse me? I said, yeah. He says, were you talking to me? I said, no. He said, well, there's no one else here. I said, no, I was talking to God. So he said, what did you say? So I told him what I said. I said, God, you with whom I have a personal relationship, Ata, Hashem, Elokeinu, our God, with whom we have a national relationship, Melech HaOlam, King of the universe, with whom we have a relationship just because we're creatures of God, Baruch, you are the source from which everything comes, Shakol, that everything, space, time, and even this food and our very existence, Niyeh, was created, Bidvaro, by your words. And he said, that is beautiful. And the truth is, it took the priest to tell me that it was beautiful, because how often do we think about how beautiful it is? But one of the ideas behind the blessing is that it was, I was at an airport in South Carolina, and I was sitting at a table. It was a small coffee shop, and I was having an espresso. I was really tired, strong, a double espresso with a shot, right? And I said a bracha, and this woman says, "You always talk to your food before you eat it?" I said it was really strong coffee. I was trying to subdue it verbally before anyway. But the idea of a bracha is beautiful to remind me of the spiritual side of life. And D, a ritual, an action, and this is a very central idea in halacha. Actions affect, this is based on the Sefer HaChinuch, who says, Ha'adam nif'al kafi pu'ulotav, the human is affected by their actions. The outside, external action affects the inner person. So, for example, let's look at kashrut. Kashrut is a classic example of that. I'm walking along the street and I'm hungry. I don't say, Mordechai hungry! Mordechai eat. Right? Walk into a store. Right, no. I've got to first of all look at it and say, oh, is it kosher? Is it not kosher? Have I eaten milk recently? Meat recently, etc. Then make a decision. Now, there's a number of steps of decision making to give me a little bit. The actions of making those decisions hopefully will impart a certain level of self-control. Shabbos, that there's a certain level at which I'll say, you know what? Whatever is happening in the stock market, whatever is happening at work, whatever is happening in the world, whatever is happening will happen without me. Shabbos is more important. And there's an action, but you have a certain action you do. There are certain actions we do. Maimonides says giving of tzedakah, of charity, is much more for the benefit of the giver than the taker. Because he says when you give, you become more of a giver. When you give, you become less attached to the material possessions. The more you give, the less attached you are to materialism in general. He says it's affecting you. You're getting the great benefit. And if you read literature in positive psychology, Martin Seligman, Tal Ben Shachar, Sonia Lyubomirsky, you will find the tremendous benefits of giving far beyond what Maimonides says in terms of happiness and contentment and everything. It's unbelievable. So it's the action which affects the inner person. Even clothing. The clothing that you wear affects you. It's an amazing thing. I remember when I was in the Israeli army, I'd get called up for reserve duty, and I would put on my uniform. As I'm putting on the uniform, the big belt and the boots and everything, I'm feeling myself expanding into Rabbi Rambo. By the time I get to the base and they give me the gun, I'm standing there saying, "Which way is Syria?" And I say, dude, you're the chaplain. It's like the kitchen's over there. There's the shul. But it does affect you. I mean, one of my second son, two sons are in the army. My second son just finished recently. He said, when they went to certain areas in Gaza. So he says, you can feel a change coming when you're putting on your combat gear. And you're getting your guns ready, and you're putting the camouflage stuff on. You can feel a change coming over you, making you a little more brutal, so to speak. That's part of unfortunately. And his unit, fantastic boys. The Israeli army is such a unique army. Right? These boys at Tzaddikim. He's in the Hesder unit. They're all yeshiva guys. Right? They're fighting terrorists. You know what I mean? He says the unit decided that because of what stuff they were doing, they needed to do stuff. They would decide as a unit would visit children's hospitals on a regular basis to entertain the kids. Jewish kids and Arab kids, by the way. Right? And they'd do this, right? It's amazing. What army does? It's amazing. Anyway, but he said you could feel the change coming over you as you change the way you dress. Right? The way you dress affects who you are. It affects how other people look at you as well. I have a friend, he's an actor. He has a friend who's a very minor actor, and usually plays dead people. And he is Irish Catholic. And he was playing in a movie that was being filmed in New York, and he was dressed as a chassid. So he's an Irish Catholic actor. He's just a minor role, really minor role. And he's got payas, beard, the whole works. And he's sick of the caterer. The firm, the movie, they have these catering things on the street when they have a movie shoot in Manhattan. So he's sick of it. So there's an Italian deli there. He walks in and says, yeah. So I said, give me the prosciutto on rye. Prosciutto, that's dried ham from the Palermo region of Italy. So he walks in, he says, he loves prosciutto. Oh. So he says, give me the ham on rye. The Italian, large crucifix behind the counter, says, no. Guy says, what do you mean no? It's a free country, give me the ham on rye. The Italian says, you want to go to heck, you do it yourself. I'm not going to help you. So the Chassid says, listen, I'm Catholic like you are. I'm an actor in a movie. He says, I've heard that before. Get out of my store. But aside from the obvious impact of clothing on the way others view you, but it has an impact on the way you view yourself. And so every minor action, we believe, has an impact on the person and the way in which we act. And then finally, in terms of mitzvahs in general, there's a concept of what I call rights versus obligation. I got this from a fantastic article by Susan Lust Stone in the Harvard Law Review. She is, I don't know where she's teaching now. She was teaching at Harvard for a while. I think she teaches at NYU. She's a legal scholar. And she has a fantastic article in which she points out that the difference between the Jewish legal system and the secular legal system is one of rights versus obligations. In Judaism, we talk not about rights, but we talk about obligations. In the secular legal system, we talk about rights, and she said that's not just a semantic difference. There's a different psychological focus if you are in a system which is everyone's talking about rights versus everyone's talking about obligations. And the difference can be brought out in a very beautiful midrash in Parshas Noah. Alexander the Great visits North Africa, and he's visiting with the African king, schmoozing, and cases came before kings. So two people from this country come before the African king, and one says, I bought a field from this man. He says, as I was ploughing the field, my plough hit something. I dig it up, it is a box of jewellery. I say, I bought a field, I did not buy jewellery, the jewellery belongs to him. The guy who sold the field says, look, it is true, I forgot that the jewellery was buried there, but I sold you the field with everything in it. The jewellery belongs to you. Alexander can't believe there's a court case like this. Can you believe this? Right? One guy says it's yours. The other guy says it's yours. This never happened. So the African king thinks about this for a while, and he says to one guy, he says, you got a son, unmarried child? The guy says, yeah, I got a son of 21. He says to the other guy, he says, how about you? He says, I got a 20-year-old daughter. So the African king says, right, by virtue of the power invested in me by me, I hereby declare the children engaged, and the jewellery will go for their wedding. Everyone's mazel tov, everyone's happy. I don't know about the kids, who cares? Parents are happy, it's obviously the main thing. Right, so then what happens is Alexander is in a state of shock. So the African says to Alexander, like, what's wrong? Did you disagree with it? Alexander says, this would never happen in my country. Never. He says, if it did, how would you rule? Alexander says, I'm telling you, don't tell me if. It would never happen in my country. The guy would take the money and run, and here would also sue him for damaging the plough with his jewellery, right? So he says, it would never happen. So the African says, yeah, but if it did, how would you rule? Alexander says, simple. I'd kill them both, take the money for the king's treasury. Duh! So now, the African king says to Alexander, he says, does the sun rise in your country? He says, yeah. Does the rain fall in your country? He says, yes. He thinks for a while. He says, you have animals where you live? Alexander says, yeah. He says, now I understand. Obviously, the sun rises and the rain falls in the merit of the animals where you live, because the humans clearly don't deserve it. End of medrash. Isn't that a beautiful medrash? So based on Susan Stone, I think the explanation is like this. The African country symbolises the halachic system. In the halachic system, and Alexander is the system of rights. So in the system of rights, what am I thinking of? I found something in my field, it's my right to keep it. The other guy is thinking, I left something in my will, it's my right to get it back. The king is saying, I'm the king, it's my right to do anything the heck I want. Anything. In the African country, how are they thinking? I found something in my field, it's my obligation to find the rightful owner, which I think is the guy who sold me the field. The guy who sold the field says, I signed a contract, it's my obligation to carry through the terms of the contract. And the king is thinking, it's my obligation to make my subjects happy. So that's what he's doing. So Susan Stone says that is what halacha is about. And I believe that when we talk about mitzvahs, the idea of mitzvahs is to impress upon myself that I am what we call in Aramaic, bar chiyuva. I'm obligated. Obligated. We don't become, in Judaism, we don't turn 12 and now have all these rights. Turn 13 and get all the rights. What happens is we turn 12 and we get obligations. We turn 13, we get bar mitzvah, bat mitzvah. It's obligations, not rights. Of course we have rights, but our focus are, because when you have a system of rights, what's my focus? What do I get? What do I deserve? What can you do for me? When I have obligations, my focus is what can I do for you? What are my obligations? To paraphrase John F. Kennedy, the Torah is telling us, ask not what others can do for you, ask what you can do for others. It's a little bit of an introduction. The rest is commentary. Go and learn. Chag Sameach.